Good to see all of you here this morning. I always like to defer and make note of the aged among us to whom we should give our greatest respect. And we've got two nonagenarians here that helped us in the leadership portion of our worship today. And so in deference to Ben Giles and the wisdom of that man, he is incredibly observant. It is cold. You got that right. So amen to that. I should have been a sociologist instead of a speech guy or a history guy. I love watching people and noticing cultural anomalies and the way a culture drifts back and forth and moves from side to side in perception, how they view things. It's fascinating to me. Here about a week ago, we memorialized a tragic event that some of our historians have tried to redact and change and rewrite about a tragedy that occurred when Japan decided, invited, to go over and bomb Pearl Harbor. Now, one of the things I noticed about the celebration of that event was it was not as much propagated. You didn't see as much press on it as we did back a few months before that at September 11th, 9/11 and what happened there. And I think one of the things that happens in culture is the further removed from an event, as tragic as it may be, and as changing as it is to a culture's perception of what they're going to do, how they function, where they go from that point forward, very much is impacted by how long ago it was, how long ago it happened. And so it's not a surprise to me to see that the December 7th was not celebrated nearly so much, not remembered, not promoted in our press, particularly such as it was in September 11th. That's a little bit closer. But I would offer to you the idea that it's being forgotten too, just like a lot of events in history. But there's a difference between those two from my perspective, okay? And let me just share with you shortly my perspective in it, because I did not live in 1942. I was not a gleam in my daddy's eye at that point in time. And so I was not around. I did not experience that. But I read it in history. And when you read historians who, as graphically and as accurately as possible, tell the story of that December 7th moment in Pearl Harbor, it just tears at your heart. When they flattened two towers in New York, Deborah's husband and I were out playing golf in Tejas and Stephenville, came in on the 9th hole just to get a beverage or refreshment. And you have to put things a little bit in context, because Kenneth was a hoot. Now, her husband, and I'm not speaking ill of the dead, I'm just telling you the way it was. Kenneth was a hoot because he lined us up and we went to play golf, and I get in the cart and we take off for hole number one. We get close to hole number one. He goes, "Stick your foot out." I said, "What?" "Yeah, I got no brakes in this one." Okay, by the end of 9 holes, I had no cleats on my golf shoes on the heel, okay? Kenneth was a hoot. So we had a lot of fun, and the moment was lively and upbeat, and we were poking each other's buttons, and we came into the clubhouse on the 9th hole getting the beverage so we go out and play 9 more holes, and we're looking on the TV, and I was watching with Kenneth and several others in there those towers fall. And you know how the news does things like that. They didn't show it once and say, "Oh no, this is terrible." No. They showed it over, and over again. And I mean, there were grown men older than me at that time, standing there with big crocodile tears running down their eyes, particularly veterans, because that event just happened. I don't know where you were on September 11th, but I remember vividly where I was. And as Kenneth and I looked at each other, there was no question in our mind we would not be playing 9 more holes. We were done for the day. It was time to go home and grab our bride and tell her, "I love you." Because that's how brief life can be. That impacted me. I don't know about you, but it left a mark on me. But that was in my viewing. That was in my lifetime. That was something I experienced. I wasn't there in New York, but the graphic nature of all of the pictures and things that happened at that point in time, I remember that vividly. And I guess one of the problems that we get into when we start reading something like Matthew 27 is it happened 2,000 plus years ago. I mean, that's well removed, right? Long time ago. But what I'm going to try to do this morning is I'm going to try to bring it to your attention. Because this happened, maybe not in our lifetime, but it has an impact on our lifetime. And so my question is going to be taken from a statement made in verse 36, which to me is phenomenal. Because in fact, this whole chapter is just phenomenal. I'm not going to do it justice in the short time I have. I'll tell you that ahead of time, but I'll try to hustle and get through it so that we can get a sense of what we're looking at in this chapter and what really happened. Because this is one of the most profound events. It is the most profound event, I would argue, in human history. I want to read for you Ephesians 1. If you've got your Bibles, follow along with me. In Ephesians 1, to me, this is one of those texts that sums up why it was that Jesus is on a Roman cross with Jews mocking him at this particular time in history. I've always been interested in Roman history. I always studied Jewish history in this point in time, in part because of this verse, this text I'm going to read you. In chapter 1 of Ephesians, in him, we're talking about Jesus Christ. There's a lot of in hims in chapter 1 and in this whole book, actually, Ephesians. In him, we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins according to the riches of his grace, which he made to abound toward us in all wisdom and prudence, having made known to us the mystery of his will. You know, there's a long time people didn't know who the Messiah was, what he was going to do, how his kingdom would be, but Paul's saying we know that stuff now. And he said, according to his good pleasure, which he purposed in himself, and here we go in verse 10, that in the dispensation of the fullness of the times, he might gather together in one all things in Christ, both which are in heaven and which are on earth, in him. I don't know whether the profoundness of that text really strikes you, but it does me, because Jesus came at a particular time in human history, beginning with Adam and ending with Joe Snuffy when Jesus comes back again and Joe's still alive and meets the Lord in the air to be with him forever because he's a Christian. Okay? That's the span we're looking at. And at this time where we're reading in Matthew 27, that's when this happened. And my question is, because here's a bunch of Roman soldiers that probably were involved in the mocking and the ridicule of Jesus. My question is, what did the soldiers see? I want to look at that this morning. 3 things that I think, maybe 4. What did the soldiers see? Well, it's very likely they were in the crowd that were twisting the thorn of crown, smashing it onto his brow. By the way, just for note, many of you medical people will understand, a lick to the head causes blood to flow. I mean, one of the most profuse bloodletting you can do is hit the guy in the head, okay? And that's what they were doing. They were beating him. They had a crown of thorns on his head, which I'm sure didn't help the matter at all. There was a massive pain involved, but look at the mocking they were doing of him. While he is going through this, while they are mocking him on the cross, I don't know why Christ didn't go just like that, and now you're vaporized, you're gone. He could have done that. He told Peter, I can call 12 legions of angels. Quite frankly, in the Old Testament, we know of an instance where he called one angel and it wiped out an entire Assyrian army. Okay, yeah, he could have done that, and yet he's on the cross saying stuff like, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It's a pivotal moment in history. Humanity's focus right here. And Jesus is putting up with a bunch of guys mocking him when they have no power other than what Jesus gave them. What did the soldiers see in that parade of mockery that they put on themselves? Oh, but that's not enough. Let's go forward. Because then they go out of that place, they force a guy to help them carry the cross, because Jesus has been up all night and then some. He's been beat to a pulp. I don't know whether you're familiar with flogging. Mel Gibson tried to do a pretty good job of it when he did his movie about the Passion of Christ. I'm not promoting that, but there are some scenes in there that are very accurate. And one of them was the cat o' nine they'll use, or the whip they use, where it's got little tiny snarls of rock and stuff in it that's hard where it hits the skin, and when it hits the skin, it snags the skin, and then when you pull the whip off, it rips the skin. Turns your back, literally, and I'm talking back, shoulders, back of the neck, all the way down to your knees, okay? And I don't know about you, but you know when Dad gave me a whipping, he never missed. He hit me, he applied the Board of Education to the seat of my learning. And I'm telling you what, it's tender back there. Just imagine having it ripped apart. That's what Jesus endured. Oh, when he started the point of carrying his cross, he was already a beaten and bruised pulp of a man. And by the way, and it just annoys me to no end, when we see pictures that they paint of Jesus, this emaciated white guy on the cross, what a joke. This was a smaller, shorter Jewish fella, a little bit darker complected, and he was a carpenter. He could hold a hammer. He had a grip. He could saw wood. No skill saws, folks. This is the regular saw. This guy had some stout to him. He was a man's man, a carpenter. And they beat him to a pulp to the point he couldn't hardly carry his own cross. Simon is conscripted, forced, compelled to carry the cross for him because he can't do it on his own. And then they nail him to the cross. I read verse 35 and I just almost curl up, just want to cry. Then they crucified him. I don't know whether you're familiar with crucifixion and some of the things that go on there, and I won't just get too graphic with it, but folks, the Romans have by this time perfected how to kill a man. And by the way, I want you to note that it's public, and this is one of the things that's kind of disturbing about that. I mean, we hear stories back in the Old West of the guys that got hung, but you know, that hanging was incredibly public, but normally they didn't strip them down to nearly nothing. They didn't fracture and put holes in their skin, they just hung them up. And normally they hung them up from a distance where you could drop and break your neck and it was instantaneous. Yes, it was public. You know, those kinds of, the guillotine back in the French Revolution, yeah, that was pretty quick. In fact, it was a kind of a gross kind of research that was done, and I read about this. I'm going, who did this? Ask the person who is about to be guillotined, they're going to lose their head, and ask them, if you can see me after you've been guillotined as your head lays in that basket, wink one eye. And they did. But it was almost instantaneous. It was over pretty quick because the blinking quit quickly. It was immediate. It was instantaneous. I mean, when we look at our modes and methods of distributing justice for those who have done heinous crimes, we do it in the most humane possible way we can think of. The idea of electrocuting a guy doesn't seem terribly humane to me. I wouldn't choose that one. Having a drug stuck in your veins and slowly, depleting your life as you kind of fade out, that's a little more. I've always been, being a gun guy, I've always been very partial to the gun. You know, when somebody shoots me between the eyes, I would not hear the gun's report. I wouldn't hear a bang. And I'd be dead immediately. But here's the trick. I was talking to a guy here not too long ago about what people miss about the cross. It wasn't all about the dying. You see, the function of the role of the cross was not just to kill the guy. It was to see how long you could keep him going before he died. It was the cruelest, most ugly way possible to kill somebody. Why, the cross was even set up. In fact, you see pictures of the cross. There are several kinds of cross. An X cross, which that was not used. A T cross, kind of like this, that was not used. The cross that Jesus was on was a Roman cross that had a bit up and a cross just kind of up high in the middle. And what people don't realize is most of the pictures you see of the cross that Jesus is way up there in the air. No, in this reality scenario, they nailed him to the cross while he's on the ground, and then they pick up the cross and they drop it in a hole and tamp it in so that it stands up straight. And in doing so, his feet almost hit the ground. This was not something way off up there. This was something close and personal that these calloused soldiers had seen over and over and over. I know in the verse there when it says they kept watch over him, the actual meaning of the Greek term there is they guarded him. In other words, they didn't want somebody coming in and stealing his body. But that's really just a part of the meaning because they're not just guarding him, but they're also seeing all this stuff go on. And so they're seeing the nails go into him. They're seeing him dropped in a hole. And that cross that they put him on, that Roman cross, a lot of the pictures you see have this little shelf conveniently located for the feet to be nailed to. It doesn't exist on the real stuff. No, they twisted the legs up and nailed them straight to the big timber. So you were twisted and contorted, and usually they had what they called a seat. And that allowed the person not to pull his hands off, because it wouldn't hold it just totally all the weight of the person by itself. No, you could come down and sit on a seat, which, by the way, as you're suffering there, becomes immensely painful. Won't get into riding bicycles because that's just an insult to how painful this process was. And the body heaves to breathe. And about the time you come down and rest on that seat, your lungs cut off your breathing, and your body instinctively goes, I need breath, and it lurches up. That's what we're looking at here. And the soldiers were watching this because they crucified him. It's not bad enough that the soldiers mocked him, but then you find the next text from 38 on down to 44. Oh, there were people walking by all over the place making fun of him, mocking him. Come on down, you can't save anything. You talking about rebuild the temple? Let God come and save him if he'll have him. Can you imagine the people doing that? And it's not like he's way far off. It's like they're walking by and they're right there. As a matter of fact, you have to understand, when Jesus made the comment, Luke, to his mother, here's your son. John is there too, as along with several women. He was communicating from the cross to them. These soldiers are seeing this. They're hearing this while they're watching. These things are going on. And finally, in verse 45, which must have been a shock to the system, because these guys are mocking him and making fun of him, and all of a sudden it gets kind of dark, and Jesus says in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? He took the sin of the world and the pain he had while he was taking it. He's crying out because he's man with the pain he's enduring. Now, I think this was where there was a scratch on somebody's conscience, because about this time in verse 47, some who stood there, well, that's the soldiers. They're all standing around there because they're the ones that tried to give him the gall to deaden the feeling that he was about to go through. He wouldn't take it. But he runs over and he says in verse 48, he runs over and fills a sponge full of sour wet vinegar and gall, something to deaden the pain a little bit for the guy. Somehow or another, the conscience, at least one of them, was kind of touched by the suffering that Jesus had. That's what they saw. These soldiers saw that. But the others said, no, let him alone. He's going to die. Let's just see if Elijah comes and gets him. Let's see if anything he's crying for happens. In verse 50, just as he cries out, and I'm convinced that partially as you put the synoptics and John together with this text, I believe it's about the time when Jesus said, it is finished. And verse 50, Jesus cried out again with a loud voice. Loud voice, mind you. You see that several times in the text? This is not something that nobody heard, nobody knew about. No, soldiers at the foot of the cross guarding this guy was hearing and seeing all of this stuff. And he cries out and he yields up his spirit. By the way, we need to understand exactly what happened here, because he makes a statement later. His life was not taken. He gave it for you and me. You know, how people can look at this and remove themselves completely emotionally from this traumatic experience, I don't know. All I can say is they have not read this well enough to understand what kind of event this was. One of its kind, the only one in humanity that really matters one way or the other. Our salvation depends on it. So it was in the aftermath of his saying, I yield up my spirit, it's finished. All creation came unglued. the one thing that I know these soldiers saw was the earth that quaked and the rocks that split. Because it says in verse 54, so when the centurion and those with him who guarded Jesus, okay, that's their job, but they saw some stuff. That's what the lesson is about. They saw the earthquake and the things that had happened. They feared greatly. They feared greatly. All of a sudden, they're all on the same team now, understanding, look what happened here. And their response, their conclusion from what they saw, truly this was the Son of God. You know the only thing wrong with that statement? Is that the tense is incorrect. And I looked it up and agreed, because I want to say, well, did they mess up there? Yes, they did. They sure did, because Jesus is the Son of God. He did not relinquish that in a death that would not keep him in the grave. And at his resurrection, he is still the Son of God. I've said it many times before, I'll continue to say it. Do you realize that when you're a member of the Lord's church, it's the only religious organization on the planet that has not been started and perpetuated by a dead man? Every other religion on the planet is that way, except Christianity, because Jesus lives in resurrection, seated at the right hand of God. Truly, this was the Son of God. I've really condensed this because I am amazed I've made it this far. But I'm going to close with the question to you. When you read this and you allow it to settle in, not as a 2,000 plus year ago event that occurred that really has very little to do with you, but the very essence of how you are, who you are, what do you see? I know what the soldiers saw, we have it recorded. What do you see? How does it change you? Here's some hardened soldiers saw crucifixion every day. There's all kinds of documentation. Josephus talks about it, where roads were lined with bodies hanging on crosses. Not way up in the air, but right there at ground level. When you walk by, you could look them in the eye almost and see their suffering as you walk down the road. You want to talk about a public display, something that impacted those who saw that? I don't know what he did to get up there, but I know what I would be saying. I don't want to do whatever it was he did, because I don't want to do that. And Jesus was innocent. In fact, that's the anomaly of it all, because at the beginning, the thieves are making fun of him too. And they're ridiculing it. Evidently, one of them turned and changed his mind a little bit as things progressed. I don't know what stage it was that it progressed to the point where he would say, he would, chide his other death buddy that's on the other cross. Hey, dude, this guy's innocent. We deserve what we're getting. This guy here is innocent. And that makes a difference. Isn't it amazing, some of the things that the general public knew while this was going on, and still it went on, and the soldiers saw this. And it changed their life. Truly, this was the Son of God. What does it do in your life? Is it just one of those World War II Pearl Harbor things where it's just so far back in the history? They had one thing I saw about World War II memorial, and the guys, they had not one single veteran was not in a wheelchair, because if you saw World War II close up and personal, you're old. No offense to anybody in here, Ben, but you've been around a while. And I love talking to Pete and Ben because they were there. They saw things. It makes the history I've studied come alive. What's really unfortunate about it is I've got kids asking me questions about things because they didn't live through it, but I have. I'm getting old. But when you look back 2,000 years, the very crux of your existence is all about what Jesus did in this moment. The question has to be, what do you see? I know what the soldiers saw. Changed them. What do you see? And the manifestation of what you saw, and whether it means anything to you, would probably show up in your life, how you live your life. Because it may have been 2,000 plus years ago, but time is nothing to God. And when that judgment comes and we stand before judgment, whether you go to heaven or not is going to depend on what you saw in this text this morning and how it impacted your life. What are you going to do to change, like these soldiers? What are you going to do? That's the question we're going to ask as we stand together.